You check your investing balance after months of trying to do the responsible thing, and it barely reacts. You skipped a few easy purchases. You moved money before it could disappear. You did the part that is supposed to make future you clap, but the screen does not feel impressed. It just shows a number that looks too small for the effort behind it. Here's the better way to see it. Do not picture a magic milestone. Picture a graph. At the beginning, the line is almost flat, because most of the movement is coming from your deposits, not from the account itself. That does not mean the habit is failing. It means the curve has not had enough money or time to bend yet. This is example math, not a promise. But once you see the shape of the curve, the first big milestone makes a lot more sense. Put the graph on the table. The left side is where most people get annoyed. You are adding money, but the line does not shoot upward yet. That's because a small balance earning growth is still a small balance earning growth. 7% on almost nothing is still almost nothing. Helpful, yes. Dramatic, no. So the early graph can look rude. The habit is doing work, but the picture doesn't reward you with fireworks. It mostly shows your own deposits stacking 1 month at a time. That's the part people often misread. A flat-looking beginning is not automatically proof that investing is pointless. It may just be the normal first phase of compounding. Your money is in the account, but there's not enough old money yet for growth on growth to look obvious. Now, give the graph normal person numbers. You start at 0. No secret inheritance, no magic uncle, just a regular paycheck trying to survive rent, groceries, bills, and the strange category called, how was that already $90? Before the month gets loud, you send $500 to investing. That is the recurring input. The other inputs are time, an estimated rate, and how often growth is counted. This is where the graph becomes useful. It is not judging you. It is just showing what happens when one repeated action gets enough time to matter. Early on, the line mostly reflects the money you put in. Later, if the money stays invested and the assumptions cooperate, the existing balance starts adding more visible movement of its own. After 1 year, the habit is real. 12 transfers have left the account. You have put in $6,000. In a simple 7% monthly compounding example, that year ends around $6,230. That extra piece is nice. It is not nothing, but it is not the part that changes the shape of your life yet. And that is the whole point. In year 1, almost all of the visible progress came from you. The graph is working, but the curve has barely started to show its curve. That can feel disappointing if you expected the account to suddenly look powerful. But if you expected a quiet first year, the receipt makes more sense. The habit is being installed before the graph becomes impressive. Now stretch the graph out. With $500 per month from a 0 starting balance, the example reaches $100,000 in about 12.1 years at 5%, about 11.1 years at 7%, and about 10.6 years at 8%. The exact return is not guaranteed. The point is the shape. The line does not explode at the beginning. It climbs, then the bend becomes easier to see as the balance gets larger. That is more useful than saying the first milestone is hard over and over. The graph shows why it feels slow. The early dollars are mostly deposits. The later dollars include more visible growth on money that is already there. That middle example is useful because it separates the feeling from the arithmetic. At $500 per month, 11.1 years of deposits is about $66,600. So in the clean 7% path, the account is not magically producing the whole $100,000. You built a large part of it with repeated deposits, and the assumed growth fills in the rest. That makes the milestone feel more honest. Here is the part that makes the graph click. At the beginning, the contribution bar is the main character. You put money in, and the account mostly grows because you put money in. Growth exists, but it is a thin slice. As the balance gets larger, that slice can get wider. Not because the rules changed, because the same percentage is being applied to a larger base. That's the difference between a tiny account earning growth and a 6-figure account earning growth. Same mechanism, bigger number for it to work on. So when the curve starts bending, it's not magic. It's arithmetic finally becoming visible. The early phase built the base. The later phase lets that base matter more on the graph. Now, look at the same rule after the account reaches $100,000. If $100,000 sits for 1 year at a 7% monthly compounding example, it becomes about $107,229 before taxes, fees, inflation, and volatility. That is not a guarantee. It is a clean way to see scale. Early on, the account could not add much because there was not much account. Around 6 figures, the same percentage can produce a number you actually notice. This is where the graph becomes more motivating. Not because $100,000 has magic powers, because the line now has a larger base under it. That is the turn. The habit built the balance, and the balance can finally make the habit feel less alone. Now, remove the monthly deposits for a second, just to isolate the effect. Using monthly compounding, $100,000 left alone for 10 years grows to about $164,700 at 5%, about $201,000 at 7%, and about $222,000 at 8%, before taxes, fees, inflation, and market swings. That comparison is useful because it shows the curve without adding new money. The account is not asleep. Under these assumptions, the existing balance is doing work by itself. Again, real life is messier than a clean chart. Returns move around. Fees matter. Taxes can matter. Inflation matters. But the chart still teaches the shape. Once the base is bigger, time has more to work with. Now put the $500 monthly habit back on the graph. This is important because the lesson is not stop contributing once the number gets bigger. The contribution still matters. It is just no longer the only visible force in the picture. The chart now has two things working at once: a larger starting balance and the repeated monthly input. That is why the later line can look so different from the early line, even though the habit itself is still boring. Boring is not an insult here. Boring is the point. Here is the later curve in numbers. Using monthly compounding, $100,000 plus $500 per month for 20 more years grows to about $477,000 at 5%, about $664,000 at 7%, and about $787,000 at 8%, before taxes, fees, inflation, and volatility. That is the impact people are usually trying to describe when they talk about the first big milestone. The early line is slow because the base is small. The later line can bend more because the base is bigger and the habit is still alive. And here's the part that makes the later graph feel different from the early one. The 20-year habit adds another $120,000 in deposits. Add that to the original $100,000, and the money you personally put into this phase is $220,000. In the 7% example, the ending number around $664,000 is much bigger than that, because the larger base had more years to work. That comparison is the visual punch. $220,000 of starting balance, plus new deposits on one side, and the assumed compounding outcome on the other. The gap is why people care about keeping the habit alive. No one gets to command the market. But you can understand the inputs: starting amount, monthly amount, time, estimated return, compounding frequency. The curve is not destiny. It is a map of what the assumptions would do. The danger, after a milestone, is that it starts feeling spendable. Life will have ideas: a better car, a nicer apartment, a trip, a bill you genuinely need to handle. Some of those choices can be responsible. This is not a shame story. But the graph is honest about one thing. If you pause the $500 habit, that input changes. If you spend part of the balance, the starting amount changes. If fees are higher, the drag changes. If time gets shorter, the runway changes. That does not mean never touch the money. It means understand which line you are changing. The goal is not to worship an account number. The goal is to protect the inputs that actually make the curve possible when real life allows it. So, the useful takeaway is simple. You do not control the exact return. You do not control whether a clean example becomes real life. You do not control every emergency, bill, job change, or market tantrum. But when life gives you room, you can control the inputs better than the outcome. The amount you automate, how long you leave it alone, whether you raise the amount when income rises, whether you avoid turning every milestone into a new monthly bill. That is why the graph matters. It does not flatter you, it does not scare you. It just shows how small, repeated choices can become a visible curve if they survive long enough. And if your amount is not $500, the logic still works. The graph changes, but the input principle stays. So if you are starting from zero, do not treat today's balance like a final grade. The first part of the graph can look painfully quiet because the monthly deposits are doing most of the work. That is not a character flaw. That is how the math looks before the base gets bigger. The practical move is to choose an amount you can actually repeat. Keep it attached to a real plan and protect the habit when life gives you the room. The curve only gets a chance to bend if the input survives. That is the cleaner version of the first 100K story. It is not a badge. It is not a secret door. It is the point where the graph finally has enough weight on the page that the next bend is easier to see. And if this helped, tell me in the comments, what is one automatic amount you could keep alive this month? It can be small. It just has to be real. Like the video and subscribe to Stick Finance for more plain English money stories that turn confusing numbers into something you can actually see.